Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck podcast. As always, I am your host, Jacob Strozyk, here with my co-host.
I'm Jacob Billington, as always.
And today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do a mock draft. Thought it would be fun, and so Jacob. So we're gonna roll through this since we have our draft coming up next week. This should be fun. As always, before we get started, I'm going to pose a nice question to my co-host. For this one, do you prefer points leagues or category leagues? And what about each one do you like? And which one do you struggle? And what do you struggle with on the other?
So that's a really good one. I think I like the head-to-head category leagues, just because it's
Okay.
plain and simple, and anybody can jump into it. But I really like points leagues, except it got ruined for me once. Somebody was
Oh
commish of
God.
a league that I was in and put the value for saves stupidly high. And then by the time I kind of caught on to that, it was like everybody already had like four goalies on their roster and there was nothing left. So it was just like I got screwed out of that league. Obviously, not every league is like that. Um, but yeah, that's just kind of put a sour taste in my mouth for the points leagues after that. But I do really enjoy um, kind of finding that balance between what's going to get you the most points and like what the risk is worth. But with the category leagues, I just like how plain and simple it is. But also, you do need that balance still between the categories itself. So you can get one guy who just gets a ton of hits. There's your hits for most weeks. So yeah.
So I got to ask before I kind of dip into what I was going to say. How many points were the saves worth? Because normally for points league, saves are worth not really much more than like point 0.2.
Yeah, I think it was like point 0.5.
Jesus.
It was
That's...
ridiculous. And it was
Were
like,
wins just worth nothing then? Or were...
well, so I think the commissioner went through and was just like, I don't know. I don't. It must have been before they were like the good default settings that they have now for the leagues,
Jeez.
and they were just going through and setting the values and kind of didn't think like some goalies get like 37 saves a game, and so yeah, saves were the most valuable thing in that league, astronomically.
It's kind of ridiculous because in my points league that I run, we have wins are worth 5, saves are worth point 0.2. If you get a goal against, it's a -2. So it balances it out that your goalies usually you're averaging from around 5.5 if they're decent to about 6.5 if they're good, and then in that sevens range if they're really good. And I think that's a good value for a goaltender considering they play a lot less games, so you still get similar value. But so you're saying you like categories more than you do like points?
Yes, I would say if I was starting a league up right now, I would probably put it to category, but I do really like the idea of the points leagues. I am in a points league this year as well, and I hope that goes a lot better than the one a few years ago. Um, but yeah, it's just that one just put a sour taste in my mouth, and it'll always kind of be sitting there hanging over my shoulders.
Well, make sure that it gets adjusted for the next time you do it, because otherwise goalies can't get overpowered at that point because categories definitely keeps that in check. I like categories. I'm more partial to points because that's kind of the system that I started playing in first. And I think it puts more value on different types of players as opposed to categories where you're a little bit more specialized, as opposed to points where you can get a little bit more diversity up and down based off of who does what. But that's just my personal preference. All right, let's jump right to our mock drafts. How we're going to do this is we're going to do in sections of 10. So we've gone through literally every single one of these players over the past couple of weeks, talking about why you should pick them, where their value really is. So we're less going to talk about why you should pick that player and more why you should take the player in that spot, or why we would be taking the player in that spot because of how we would build our teams and the value that we see based off of that position, player, or draft spot. So we just want to preface it with that more than anything else. That being said, let's do first 10. Give me your top 10.
So number one, Connor McDavid, easiest pick. Number two, Leon Draisaitl. Number three, Nathan McKinnon. Number four, Austin Matthews. Number five, Matthew Tkachuk. Might be a little bit high for some people, but I think he's going to build on that monster year in playoffs. Number 6, David Pasternak. Number 7, Cale Makar. Number 8, Jack Hughes. Number 9, Adam Fox. And number 10, Brady Tkachuk.
Okay, mine is actually pretty similar. It's just slightly different as far as the orientation goes. I have McDavid at 1, Draisaitl at 2. I have Makar at 3, McKinnon at 4, Matthews at 5, Matt Tkachuk at 6, Adam Fox at 7, Pasternak at 8, Jack Hughes at 9, and Rantanen at 10. So as far as like a pattern goes, I really look for superstar 100-point potential from forwards, as well as possibly even point per game and 20 plus goals as far as defensemen go. That's really what I'm looking for. If I'm picking in a top 10, I'm looking for that mega star that's going to carry my team when everybody else isn't really doing anything.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think our lists had the exact same people, except for I had Brady Tkachuk, you had Mikko Rantanen. I have Rantanen at 11, so we'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, like I agree. All the same kind of threshold that the 100-point for a forward, the point per game mark for a defenseman, absolutely. I do take defensemen a little bit lower than some forwards. Obviously, you have Makar up at 3, and what did you have Fox at?
I had Fox at 7.
Okay, yeah. So I would be fine with taking Fox at 7 if Makar's off the board already. But yeah, I usually like the top 5 or 6. I usually just stick with forwards just because you can really get that superstar level. And with defensemen, there's so many offensive defensemen now. Like I have some players really low down my list that might put up better points in production than Fox and Makar this year.
Yeah, there really are just a lot of really good point scoring defensemen. And there's even some that I don't have on this list that you could argue eventually towards maybe like the 30 to 50 mark that you could slip those guys in there. But again, it's still based off your preference. What do you feel this player is going to offer you? And that's kind of why I have Makar so high at 3, because once I pick if I were to pick McDavid at 1 and Draisaitl at 2, Makar at 3 to me is just such a cut above the rest of the defensemen that I would feel more comfortable taking him there rather than grabbing another center or rather than grabbing my first winger, where I could take somewhere in my next round in that 20s to 30s mark that I could get similar value, but not the same as somebody like Matthews or somebody like Tkachuk on the wing or somebody like McKinnon, because they're all still going to be obscene point scorers. But I would just want that top defenseman to kind of differentiate my team as I balance it down the line.
Yeah, that's fair. And like I said, there's only a 4-pick difference between where we had them. Like it's not egregious or anything. So yeah, like I completely get your justification. Same reason I would pick him at 7. It's just because he's that far ahead of everybody that he's worth a top 7 pick to me. But maybe not quite top 3. I could argue, or you could convince me to take him above Austin Matthews at 4, probably pretty easily.
The only reason I feel like you could probably convince you to take above Matthews is because of the down year last year. If Matthews put up 60 goals last year, there's people that are just going to jump up and down to take him at 4 and 5, as opposed to probably somewhere in the top 3, because goals are king. If you got a guy that's just dropping goals left and right, especially at a 60 or 55 goal pace constantly, you're just diving at that. So I would, if that would be the case, I would have put Matthews higher on my list as opposed to McKinnon or Makar. All right, let's do 11 through 20.
So 11, I already said I have Mikko Rantanen. 12, Jason Robertson. 13, Mitch Marner. 14, Nikita Kucherov. 15, Rasmus Dahlin. 16, Elias Pettersson. 17, Braden Point. 18, Kirill Kaprizov. 19, William Nylander. And 20, Ilya Sorokin.
Okay, again, we got some similar names, a little bit of differentiation here. 11, I have Brady Tkachuk. 12, I have Kucherov. 13, Robertson. 14 would be my first goalie off the board, Andrei Vasilevsky. 15, I would put Dahlin. 16, I have Shesterkin. 17, I have Jake Ottinger. 18, I have Kaprizov. 19, I have Braden Point. And then 20, I would have Pettersson. So the 2 goalies is probably the thing that, or the 3 goalies there is probably what stands out most. noticeably amongst everybody else. And that's because, to me, the rest of those players above them, again, the superstar forwards, I've already gotten that. If those are off the board, then I need to find that thing that differentiates me. I need that superstar goaltender. And amongst the three of them, they're all top caliber goalies and they all play for top caliber teams. So I want that little bit of a buff there that I could take some time, and instead of picking another top goalie and, skipping out on maybe a wing or a defender, I can take my next goalie a little bit later, maybe towards the 60s, 70s, and I would end up getting somebody like a Vanacek or a Devin Levi, or you could get like a Bobrovsky, somebody who's still going to be a good starter for you, but isn't just going to, own that net like you would expect them to, either in a points or a category league. So that's kind of where my shift would turn, and my focus would be in this section to thinking about goaltending and thinking about rounding out that position as opposed to just thinking about goals and forwards.
Yeah, that's fair. And I have the exact same thing to say when we do our next 10. Because after Sorokin, I do have a couple more goalies right there. And they're all interchangeable. So I have all my goalies clumped up into kind of one group there, just because that's where I'm going to take a goalie. Depending on who's available, that's what I'm taking. But for my kind of 11 through 20, I have a lot of really high point producing players there. I'm really definitely going after a forward in that 10 to 20 range and trying to get as many points as I can out of it. So like Nikita Kucherov, if you're confident in his health this year, absolutely taking him top 15. Same as Jason Robertson, Mikko Rantanen, probably going to have a monster year this year as well. So all those guys is who I kind of target in that range. And then closer to 20, even still, I have Braden Point, Kirill Kaprizov, and William Nylander. That's at least a 40 goal scorer. So that's kind of what I go for there, is just good goals, great points.
So in your top 10, you look for scores, and then your top 20, you're looking for another scorer, or would you prefer a defenseman on one of those over the other?
I usually go for 2 point producers in the top 20.
Forwards? Okay.
But it has bit me quite a few times. It's just kind of it's the way I pick. Doesn't always work out for me, but sometimes it works really well.
Well, that's the fun of it, though, isn't it? Because we're not psychic.
Yeah.
None of us can actually tell you 100% this is the best possible player to pick at this spot, unless their name is McDavid. That's really the only time that I'm 100% confident that I'm not steering you wrong and taking McDavid at first overall. But
why not?
Pretty,
Why can't you tell
pretty
me?
much. Oh, there's this other guy named JJ Paterka. I heard he's pretty good. You can take him first overall.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but that's kind of the whole point of doing this, is you find the value for how you like to draft. You like to go scoring heavy and you go forwards first. I like to build from the back out more than anything else, or I like to build from center down. So it depends on what type of league that I'm in that I would place that type of value. If I'm in a points-based league, I'm going to build center down. So I'm going to do center, defense, goalie, and then fill out my wingers on the side. That's how I would draft something like that. And it kind of reflects here as more of a split between the category and the points. And that's kind of how I weighed the value of these, types of players, as opposed to categories where I would build, more bottom up, where I'd start defense, goalie, and then fill out my forwards. Because to me, forwards are a little bit more interchangeable in a category league as opposed to a points league.
Well, and it's a lot easier to find any random forward that's going to put up 75 points just because of their line mates than it is to find a superstar goalie like drafting Aiden Hill. You're not going to do that.
Right.
Last year, you wouldn't have done that, is what I meant to say. Sorry.
Or Allmark last year. Nobody thought Allmark was going to put up that type of a year. I don't think he was drafted anywhere before like a third or fourth round for most people, because a lot of people also thought Boston was going to be very good last year. So it happens. You can find those players on your waiver wire or at the later portions of your draft. So if you stack up on superstars that first, it's a little bit easier to justify those picks.
Yeah.
All right. Before we go into our next section, real quick, here is a message from the hockey writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Raiders? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Raiders could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Raiders website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
Okay, everybody, we're back. Let's skip right into the next section, which is 21 through 30. And there's a nice little deviation here. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so this is where our lists start to get pretty different. I'll start at 20. I already said it, Ilya Sorokin. But just to tie that into 21, Andrei Vasilevsky, 22, Igor Shesterkin, 23, I have Timo Meier, and then 24, I have Jake Ottinger. So those goalies all kind of clumped together. 25, I have Alex Ovechkin. 26, I have Miro Heiskanen. 27, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. 28, Artemi Panarin. 29, Tim Stützle. And 30, Tage Thompson.
Okay. Yeah, again, there's this little variation here. So 21 for me is Tage Thompson. 22, I have Mitch Marner. 23, I have Tim Stützle. 24 is Zibanejad. 25, Sorokin. 26 is Willie Nylander. 27 is Nugent Hopkins. 28 is Jack Eichel. 29 is Dougie Hamilton. And 30 is Roman Josi. So give me your reasoning for this kind of clump here.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go too deep into the goaltending just because everything that you said, I like to get that good goaltender high and just a couple picks below where you had a few of your goaltenders. But yeah, I put them all together because any one of them are a valid pick to me. You just kind of, that's where I like to take a goalie. Whichever one's going to be available, that's who I'm going to take. A couple of the other guys in there, like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Artemi Panarin, Tim Stützle, and Tage Thompson, like I think that there's a good chance that they can all hit 100 points this year. It's the scoring is going up in the NHL. I do think that Ryan Nugent-Hopkins might take a bit of a step back, but the power play points, like we talked about, like they're just so valuable. He gets to play with the best group in NHL history. They might not be that again this year, but they're going to be up there. So yeah, like this is another kind of, I would go for a goaltender in this group, but if I'm just kind of ranking them all, I guess I have another high scoring forward in this section. But if I was making a pick out of these players, it would be a goaltender.
So you kind of favor forward, goaltender would kind of be your progression if it was rounds per se, 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Fair
and
enough.
like it all depends on how the draft is going. So if we get to pick 16 and there's already like Sorokin and Vasilevsky off the board, I'm going to go ahead and take a goalie there. I'm not going to let myself slip through that. But if I was dictating how the draft is going, right around that 20 to 25 is where I'm taking my first goalie.
Yeah, if you were drafting for all 10 teams, presumably. But that would be the dream, wouldn't it? Play against yourself and see how well you can do. No, it'd be insane. So this is kind of where there's a bit of a theme for mine. There's a lot of centers and there's a lot of scoring kind of in this section for me. I have a couple of the outliers in Sorokin, Hamilton, and Josi, but that's kind of just where they're filtered in. I couldn't justify putting Sorokin as a lower pick because at that point, if I didn't grab a goaltender in that second round, I'd be like, crap, I really need somebody who's that high end. And I really wouldn't want to skip out on Sorokin. That's why he's kind of towards the middle there. But in general, it would be a center pick more for me just to really get that scoring presence. So somebody like Tage Thompson, who's going to put up a bunch of goals and also get a decent amount of hits. Somebody like Marner, who's going to get goals and assists. Somebody like Stützle, who does that split. Nugent Hopkins with that, power play point. Eichel, who's probably going to have a better year and usually does kind of a split with the slight favor towards the playmaking. I really want to pick my center because I value centers higher than most players. That's just me personally. I tend to find you get better fantasy results when you favor getting your centers quicker because you can get scoring down the middle, you get playmaking down the middle, You can get hits, and you can also get a lot of face-offs. Face-offs isn't always counted in every single league, but if this is a big if, your league does count it, somebody who takes a lot of draws and actually wins a lot of draws is at higher value. And it's at that point where I would put somebody like Thompson or Eichel a little bit lower because they're not great on face-offs. But if they are, take somebody who wins draws and scores points kind of in the section. That would be my logic kind of for this third round per se.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about Brady Tkachuk at 10. That's what makes him just so valuable. We already talked about him a couple times over the past few weeks, like you said.
Yeah.
But those face-offs, he's a winger. He is not a center whatsoever, but he takes and wins a ton of face-offs. So when you kind of bring that into your center conversation, extremely valuable. You're always, if it's a draw between two guys, just look at their face-off stats or even their plus-minus stats, like just those micro stats that you're not really looking at. So like, if you're going to take Nico Hischier or Mika Zibanejad, let's just say, you should take, if in your mind that they are neck and neck, you should take Hischier just because he finishes with the better plus-minus. I don't know that for a fact, but he's the defensive center.
He's better defensive metrics.
Exactly. So all around, he's going to get those micro stats better than Zibanejad would. But that's just an example. I'm not comparing the two intentionally.
No, I like that comparison because you brought up that idea of a winger who can take faceoffs, adding a little bit more value, because even if they're not the center position, you're still getting points every time that they take a faceoff. Somebody that I know that I would put a slightly higher value on because that is Jeff Skinner. He does that a lot because Tage Thompson gets thrown out of the faceoff circle every 5 seconds. So it's just the reality of the situation. And me knowing that as a Buffalo fan, I'd be like, I might want to take Skinner in that spot as opposed to somebody else. Skinner isn't on this list just because there's a bunch of other players that I feel are higher than him. But he's a player on that topic conversation that adds that little extra value because of a winger who takes draws.
Yeah. And
so I like that.
And that's kind of why I have so I have Stützle 29th, Tage Thompson 30th. If they were better in the draw, they would probably be up closer to like 23, 24. They definitely have the potential to be up there. They just need to get better in the faceoff dot.
Yeah, I have Thompson higher than most people. 1, home bias. Yes. 2, I firmly believe his scoring outweighs his face-off issues because he's still good defensively and he gets decent amount of hits and he gets decent amount of blocks, but it's his scoring potential that is overridden by that face-off issue. Plus, normally, if I have Thompson, I'm probably grabbing either Tuck or Skinner who are going to take the draws for him when he gets tossed out anyway. So I'm not losing anything off of it at that point. But that's my personal logic. And there's nothing wrong with taking home picks. Everybody's going to do it. There's always going to be that guy that's going to be sitting at 5th overall or who's going to be sitting at, 3rd overall as a Toronto fan, and he's going to pick Matthews. Or there's going to be that guy who is just way, way too high on Jack Hughes as a Devils fan, and he's going to pick him at 4 or 5. And that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. It's just a matter of how do you want to build that team? And me personally, I want to build a team with players that I like so I can actually root for my team as opposed to being that guy who's sitting in a Sabres game being like, oh man, I really wish Austin Matthews just scored on us just now. I need those points.
Yeah.
I hate being that guy.
Thing. Like, I cover the Senators at the Hockey Writers. I could pick every single Ottawa Senator on my fantasy team, assuming it works out that way that I can draft them all. As long as I'm drafting them in the right positions, there's nothing wrong with taking as many people as you want from your favorite team or the team you cover or the city you live in. As long as you're just taking them in the right vicinity, nothing wrong with that at all.
Right. And it's especially true in leagues that are more just for fun as opposed to like big pot buy-ins, which is not really the thing that we're talking about here. We're not a big pot buy-in type grouping. So that's just an explanation of that logic. All right, let's go ahead. Let's do 31 to 40.
Right after Stützle and Thompson, I have Roope Hintz at 31, 32 Quinn Hughes, 33 Connor Hellebuck, 34 UC Saros, 35, Sidney Crosby. It feels criminal to have him that low, but it's just that's the only place I could fit him. 36 is Zibanejad. 37 is Jesper Bratt. 38, Dougie Hamilton. 39, Evan Bouchard. And 40, Kyle Connor.
Okay. We have a couple of similarities, but a little deviation as well. 31, I have Georgiev. 32, I have Timo Meyer. 33 is Rupa Hintz. 34, little too low in general, but I had to do it, was Heiskanen. 35 was Quinn Hughes. 36 is Alex Ovechkin. 37, Sidney Crosby. Again, I agree with you, low, but just the way it ended up playing out. 38, Steven Stamkos. 39, John Tavares. And 40, I also have Kyle Connor.
It hurt me not to put Stamkos in. He's had 2 great seasons the last 2 years. I just couldn't do it, and I don't know. I think his switch to wing is what did it for me. If he was still a center, he would definitely be in my top 50. But because he's a wing now, he's probably like 54.
Yeah, he loses out on some of that extra value because he's kind of been. We can essentially say he's been replaced at center by Point, because Point's the one that really is their top line center. And, that is just the reality of the situation. But I like keeping Stamkos in this top list because of the scoring ability. He's not old per se, but he's not young either. He's getting up there in age. So, is the decline imminent? Not necessarily. He's still got a few good years still left in him. But that's kind of how the theme of the bottom half of this 10 works out for me, because you'll see I got Ovechkin, Crosby, Stamkos, Tavares, that kind of older guard group that still produces really consistently and really well, and you're going to get a ton of fantasy value out of despite the age. So if you're in a redraft league, these guys probably go higher, but if you're looking at a keeper league, this is kind of where I'd be more comfortable taking them in that 4th, 5th round, because I want those points. I still want that production out of those types of players. I don't want to miss out on that just because they have a higher age number. But I also don't want to pick them super high, because I still want that little bit of extra youth as I'm looking towards my eventual keepers or my dynasty league, if this is like the first year kind of jumping into something like that.
Yeah. And I'm the same way. I had Ovechkin a bit higher just because of that goal output. I had him in 26th.
He gets more hits too. That's the other thing.
Yeah, and the hits too. He's not physically slowing down. His goal scoring might go down a little bit. Just 2 goals a year at this point. But yeah, they're definitely getting up there in age. I do have Tavares kind of in the next tier. But yeah, just once you hit that 33, 34, they do lose a bit of value, especially in the keeper leagues, like you said. But all still very, very capable players. I do have my next tier of goaltenders in here. So I have Hellebuck and Saros. I know that I'm going to kind of spoil your last 10 a little bit, but you don't have Hellebuck in your list. I'm a lot higher on the Jets than a lot of people are coming into this year. I do think that Hellebuck is going to have another good season. And he might not even be doing it in Winnipeg. That's kind of the big thing. He is playing for a job. He's playing for a contract. I have really high hopes for him. You see Saros right there too, just because that defense in front of him, as well as him being an amazing goalie. So yeah, that's where I'm taking my next tier, depending on who's available.
So you bring up a point where I kind of want to just talk about it, because you said that you have a lot of faith in the Jets.
Yeah.
This is just, again, me personally, I don't have faith in them, not as a team. I still think them as a team is going to do well. I think they're still going to have success in the actual season. But as far as Winnipeg players on my fantasy team, I don't have the faith in them to produce at the level that I would in previous years. I don't feel like the offense is going to be up there. I don't think Hellebuck is going to be bad, but I don't think he's going to be up to the standard that I would normally be expecting from what I would normally say is a perennial Vezina contender. So he would be like a top 4, top 5 goalie in just about any other situation. But just the state of what Winnipeg is right now doesn't give me fantasy confidence in them. So that's why I don't have Hellebuck on my list. It's why I do still have some of the other top Winnipeg players, like I have Connor at the bottom of this spot, because to me, he's one of those consistent goal scorers. But it's just a matter of personal belief in that team in a fantasy setting. There's just teams that do that for me every single year. Last year, it was Boston at the start of the year. 100% wrong. That's just the way. Hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles, and that's just the way it goes sometimes. That's fine. But who knows? Maybe I'll be 100% wrong, and Winnipeg just drops 67 wins this year. We'll never know. It's just the way. It's just the way things end up going. Like I said, we're not psychic, so.
And when I say
personally just don't like to dive into it that much.
That's fair. And when I say I have faith in them, I don't mean like President's Trophy faith. I just mean like you challenging Minnesota for third in the Central. Kind of get a good spot in the playoffs. Maybe won't do much in the playoffs, but I think that they're going to be a better team than a lot of people are predicting them to miss. So
I don't think they'll miss. I still think the West is a fairly weaker conference, especially compared to some of the ridiculous teams in the East, which is kind of a swap from a bunch of years ago. So I still think they'll be a good team. I still think they're a playoff team. I'm not high enough on them in fantasy to justify taking some of these other players in higher spots. That's really only my logic with that.
Fair enough.
Okay, let's do the last 10. Let's do 40 to 50.
So I got one of your wingers you already mentioned. I don't think you have him in your draft yet, but Alex Tuck at 41. I got Erik Karlsson at 42, Andrei Svechnikov at 43. He wasn't in my top 10 wingers list when we did them last week. You convinced me, though. I had to put him up there.
We'll take that as a win.
Jack Eichel at 44, Roman Josi at 45, Linus Ullmark at 46, Clayton Keller at 47, Zach Hyman at 48. 49, I have Cole Caulfield, and 50, I have John Tavares.
Okay, so there's a little bit less of a theme. Kind of before I do my 10, give me your what do you feel the theme was there, if there was one?
There wasn't really much of a theme going into that. I was just kind of looking at. I had probably 15 players for that last 10, maybe even 20 players, and I was just like, if I am picking right now, and I took what my roster would already be in a perfect world out of the equation. And I said, which guy would I look at? And I just kind of ranked them from first to 20 or whatever was in that last tier for me. And just said, who do I want on my team the most? Who am I most comfortable with going into this year? Now, at the same time, I have Erik Karlsson at 42. I don't know how comfortable I am with that, but I'm a believer. I have to be.
I know I've harped on Karlsson a bunch, so let me do my list, and then I'll kind of dive into my logic behind some of these. 41, I have Mark Scheifele. 42, I have Charlie McAvoy. 43, Artemi Panarin. 44 is where I have Erik Karlsson. 45, I have Zach Hyman. 46, I have Evander Kane. 47, I have Brandon Montour. 48, Nico Hischier. 49, Linus Ullmark. And 50, I have Clayton Keller. Now, full disclosure, I had 4 or 5 players that I was going to sort through for this 50th pick. And I kind of just picked one at random because they're all so close for different reasons. And it ended up being Keller that was kind of the one that just got the attention. Tuck was one of the players that I was considering for that 50th spot because, as I talked about in previous weeks, I think he's the top end player and I think he has a lot of value there. Now, Erik Karlsson, since we're on that topic, you say you had him at 42. I have him at 44, so we're not far off as, in general, the way we would pick him. I've said it all throughout the offseason. I don't think he's going to be nearly as good as he was last year, especially the Letang situation being so similar to him and Burns in San Jose. But there is that caveat of it's still Erik Karlsson. He still can do it. He has that capacity to be that 70-plus point defenseman. I don't think he's going to hit the projections, some of the projections that I've seen from, other mock drafts or otherwise, that he's going to be scoring 90-plus points. I think that's just over the top and a little bit ridiculous. I think the 100-point season is an outlier. I think he is that point per game 75 to 80-point defender when he's really Erik Karlsson and on his game. And that's where I think his value sticks there. Plus, since he's up there in age, that's where that lower tier comes, as opposed to me putting him. If there's a defenseman scoring those types of points and he's 25 years old, he's a top 10 pick all day. But because of his age, he's down here.
So, hypothetical here. Karlsson was still in San Jose. Is he going up your list?
No. Still the same spot.
Still right around the same. Okay.
It,
And
it may be higher at like 35 as at the absolute highest, but it's still in that, older generation fill out the roster positioning for him.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Doesn't really matter that he's in Pittsburgh now because I think the benefits that he's going to get from playing with Malkin, Gensel, Crosby is going to be weighed out by the time that he's going to split with Letang. So I don't think it's going to be that much better or worse of a situation for him. I think it's just going to be a different situation.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but with the Penguins having so much just older generation, but still high end talent, I don't know what it is, but it just reminds me of the idea that if you have a superstar team, there's not enough ice for everybody to be taking up all of that space. Something's got to give, and somebody's going to be producing a lot less. I feel like it's Carlson because it's still the Crosby Malkin show in Pittsburgh. Carlson's just there to add to the equation, not run the show, as opposed to when he's in San Jose. Who's he competing with? Couture, Hurdle?
Yeah.
Not exactly. They're still both great players, but they're not Crosby and Malkin.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, some of the other guys that I had in here, Svechnikov and who else did I have? Hyman. Svechnikov and Hyman are kind of pretty similar value to me. They're both pretty good physical forwards. I guess they're both power forwards.
Yeah, they are.
Hyman might get more points, and maybe even more hits, but I see Svechnikov, if he comes back at 100%, probably he's poised for a huge breakout year anytime now. He's shown that he has all of it. I wouldn't be surprised to see him come out and score 40 goals and 95 points this year. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. But I have to have him this low because he hasn't shown that he can do that yet.
No, you're right. I would love to have put Svechnikov into this tier of players. But again, this goes into that concept of I don't have confidence that he's going to be fully healthy again. So I'm not justifying picking him at this high of a spot just yet. Not quite yet. If he has that breakout year, I think absolutely. You brought up Hyman, and he's kind of a player I want to highlight because we talked about him a few times. But I have him and Evander Kane right next to each other at 45 and 46 because to me, they're interchangeable. High shots, high points, high hits, and they do basically the same thing. It's just which player do you want more? That really is kind of the question. But either one, you're still going to get about the same type of production out of them as far as points league goes or even categories because they do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So I love Hyman as a fantasy forward, especially over the past couple of years, and I'm really glad to see him come into his own. I want to see him do more this year. I know he did a lot, but I want to see him just do a little bit more and really, really drive home that top tier and maybe elevate him to that top 20 spot for drafting next year.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to throw in? Otherwise, talk about, or we can get this wrapped because I have one mini question for you if you don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, I could add another hour and a half of content to this and go in depth.
Yeah, we can keep going forever.
The 27 guys that I would have ranked 51st. But
right.
It's not worth it. We already talked about all the guys. We did our top 10 of each position. We kind of broke down all the players at each position that you should be looking at in your draft.
Mm-hmm.
I got nothing really else to add that you haven't heard already.
All right, so then I'll pose the mini question. As far as a young player that you're confident is going to play this year that isn't named Connor Bedard or Devin Levi, since I like to talk about him too much, so I'll break myself down here. Who would you put in that 45 to 50 spot? Who would you feel comfortable taking in that spot if you're reaching just a little bit on a rookie?
So you already know my answer to this. We talked about this yesterday.
But we're going to talk about it on air.
It's Logan Cooley, 100%. I think that he's going to be right there with Connor Bedard. And I thought this before his incredible goal. This isn't something new that I've been thinking. It's kind of been all summer. He's got an extra year on him in development, on Bedard, sorry. He's going to be playing with way better line mates. I think if he can take over that number one center position from Barrett Hayton and end up playing with Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz, I think he might even outproduce Bedard. He might not score as many goals, but I think I could see Cooley flirting with 65 points this year, which is right around where I see Bedard ending up. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Coyotes headed into this year. Now, like I said with the Jets, not contending for the President's Trophy or first in the Central, but right around there. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs either. But right around that 9th, 10th in the conference is where I think they're finishing, which is pretty good by their standards.
I don't have anything to disagree with on Logan Cooley because I've been on the Cooley hype train since the day he got drafted. And I was like, what an absolute steal of a pick, even though it's so high. Just what an absolute steal of a pick. So I'm not going to disagree, but I do want to throw in a player that I feel could have that, top potential reach in there. And I'm going to go with Adam Fantilli. I really loved what I saw during the training camp things that I've seen so far, and during his rookie tournament stuff as well. He is just so poised and so well driven in every aspect that I saw. It rivals what you saw out of Cooley. Yeah. Granted, not up to the same development, so he's probably going to still struggle. Yeah. But there's a lot of opportunity for him in Columbus. And I think he's going to take that and absolutely just run away with it. So if there's somebody that I would reach on personally, it would be Fantilli, kind of in that 47 to 50 spot if I'm really building my dynasty for the future, because he's a future top at least 15 to 20 center in the league, if you ask me.
Well, we didn't really specify if this was going to be for a redraft or a keeper league. This was just kind of a general list for how we draft. But if you told me that this was just for a keeper league, some of the guys like Bedard, Fantilli, and Cooley, I would probably have above John Tavares. I would have them above Jack Eichel probably. Like Zach Hyman for sure, Cole Caulfield. Like they're definitely sliding into the top 50 if it's a dynasty league.
Well, yeah, because at that point you're not just taking for this year, you're building. And you're really thinking about, am I going to be a contending team this year, or am I building to be a rebuilding team this year so that next year in the coming years, I'm going to be an absolute dynamo. So take that into consideration if you're using our mock draft in any way, shape, or form towards your drafts. If it's a redraft, you can pretty much use this as you see fit. If it's a dynasty or a keeper, favor the younger players as opposed to the older ones, and let the older ones drop just a little bit more into that 5th, 6th round, where you can really get some higher value young players higher, and the higher value old players just a little bit lower.
And
that's
when
kind of how I would build it.
You're not going to be the only one in your dynasty league doing that. Mm-hmm. So you'll get some steals on some the 31-year-old players. You're going to get some steals in that draft.
And be patient. Be willing to wait to take those players, because the young ones that you have confidence in might just pan out to end up running the league, and you can just start dominating leagues for 5+ years. All right. Anything else to add?
Nope, that's all I got today.
All righty. Well, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode of Fantasy Forecheck. Next show, we're actually going to be live streaming our Hockey Writers Fantasy Draft. It's gonna be fun. We're gonna have different fantasy owners from the Hockey Writers coming in and out of the show, kind of talking about their picks, talking about their logic, how they want to build their teams, and how everything's going to go throughout the season. We're not going to be able to fit every single person because it's a 20-person league, so it's really, really hard to pull all of that in. But we're going to be drafting ourselves as well as interviewing and talking about all of that. So feel free to tune in. It's going to be a fun time. It's going to be long too, but still, it'll be a long. It might be long, but you can definitely learn a lot from all the different voices that we're going to have on here about hockey and about fantasy and about everything else in between. So even if you can't tune in live, we'll eventually post it, obviously, and you can rewatch it and kind of go through and feel it that way. Either way, it's going to be a great time. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your preferred listening channels and to the Hockey Writers Podcast and YouTube pages, where you can find everything and anything else hockey related. You can also follow me on Twitter at Strozyk7.
And I'm on there as at Jacob Billing 10.
Feel free to drop us a like, and we will keep you up to date on anything else fantasy throughout the year. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you next time.